Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling, slightly off balance, but you couldn't quite put your finger on exactly why? Well, if so, you are definitely in the right place. We're going to map out exactly how manipulative people secretly test your boundaries. We'll go step by step, using tactical intel straight from the cognitive blueprint.
Charm is easy until you say no. We really need to highlight a massive reality inversion here. You see, dangerous or toxic people, they rarely cross your major boundaries in massive explosive ways right out of the gate. They just don't start with those blatant violations. Instead, it's more like a series of microscopic infractions. These are completely invisible tests designed specifically to see if you're actually paying attention.
Here's our tactical blueprint for today. First, we'll look at the silent compliance audit. Then, tests 1 through 3 on calibration, followed by tests 4 through 6 on probing. After that, we'll hit test 7, the shatter point, and wrap up with a step-by-step tactical defense. Moving right along to section 1, the silent compliance audit. We need to thoroughly understand the hidden psychological motive behind these everyday interactions before we can actually defend against them. Now, what's really fascinating here is this concept of the compliance audit. You can think of it as a behavioral screening process. See, long before a covert aggressor makes a major move, they map you out, kind of like a resource or honestly like a very compliant ATM. They might drop a tiny, ambiguous insult wrapped up in a joke, or just slightly shift an agreement you made. But here is the absolutely crucial point. If you swallow that discomfort just to avoid making a scene, they register that data point. You've essentially just signaled that your frame, and by frame I mean your personal boundaries and underlying sense of reality, is soft. So if you don't know what these micro-tests look like, you're literally onboarding your own exploitation. Okay, section 2, tests 1 to 3, which are all about calibration. Let's look at the specific signs where they test the waters to see exactly how you respond to pressure. So, test number 1 is the micro-insult calibration. Here's how it plays out. They deliver a sharp, backhanded compliment, or this incredibly specific, critical joke that's poorly disguised as casual humor. And the moment you react with tension or pushback, bam, they instantly deploy this exact line. "I was only joking. You're too sensitive." Let me be clear. Make no mistake. This is not humor. It's a highly calculated gauge to see if you'll fiercely defend your ground or if you're going to back down and internalize the insult. To completely neutralize this, just use a simple script. Ask them, "What exactly did you mean by that?" Literally, force them to explain the joke. Moving to test number 2, tactical time slippage. For a concrete example, think about someone who consistently slides into meetings 10 minutes late, or maybe they text you at the last possible second to alter an agreement. Well, guess what? They aren't just disorganized. Their actual psychological goal is testing whose time carries more weight in the relationship. Every single time you accept a casual delay without a recalibration, you're forced to yield a piece of your frame. A really great calm defense script to use here is just saying, "I only have until the top of the hour, so we'll need to keep this brief." Let's move to test 3 and see how this all builds. This is the weaponized favor. And honestly, it's perhaps the most dangerous one because it looks exactly like generosity. They force an unasked for, low-level favor onto you, something like buying your coffee or doing a tiny task. But the psychological goal? It's entirely different. They're actually creating artificial debt. Later on, they're going to use that exact debt to demand a massive, asymmetrical boundary concession from you. They're basically testing to see if you can be bought cheaply. Your script to break this one is super simple. Just say, "I appreciate the gesture, but I prefer to handle my own coffee." All right, section 3. Tests 4 to 6, probing. If the first 3 were about calibration, these next 3 act as much deeper probes into your psychological makeup. Test number 4 is strategic forgetfulness. Imagine this. You state an explicit, clear preference. You say, "I don't answer work calls after 7 p.m. But then, 3 days later, they call at 8 p.m. And when you call them out on it, they act completely oblivious, saying, "Oh, I totally forgot." Guys, this is a deliberate probe. They're testing to see if your explicitly stated boundary requires constant, exhausting upkeep from you, or if it actually has teeth. It's a total goalpost shift. Your tactical response here? Say, "As I mentioned before, my availability hasn't changed." Next up is test number 5, the information probe. A concrete example of this is when you're in a completely casual conversation and suddenly, out of nowhere, they ask highly personal, slightly inappropriate questions. The psychological goal here is pure data gathering. They are actively looking for your psychological blind spots, your past mistakes, your insecurities, your finances, the whole shebang. If you answer them purely out of social politeness, you've literally just handed them the raw materials for future manipulation. Your script here is simple and firm. That's a rather personal question. I'm not going to answer that. And this brilliantly leads us to test number 6, the pity anchor. Covert aggressors love using selective vulnerability to test you. The concrete example here is someone sharing an overwhelming, incredibly tragic personal story entirely too early in a relationship or working dynamic. But let's look at their true psychological goal, which is toxic compliance. They are evaluating your emotional boundaries to see if you'll drop your guard out of pity, and then immediately shift into managing their emotional state at your own expense. Your defense script for this one? That sounds really difficult. You should speak to a professional about that. This brings us to section 4. Test 7, the shatter point. We've finally arrived at the last part of the behavioral audit, and honestly, this is the most revealing boundary test of them all. So, test number 7 is the reactionary counterattack, also known as the shatter point. This happens the very first time you calmly say no to a minor request. I want you to pay micro attention to their face in that exact moment. If they respond with flashing anger, silent withdrawal, or maybe some cold sarcasm, well, the test is complete. The psychological goal of this reaction proves a pretty ugly truth. They never actually respected your boundary. They only ever respected your compliance. Your script when facing this kind of anger, simply state, I can see you're upset, we can revisit this when you're calm, and then literally just walk away. Okay, I really want you to take a good look at this summary checklist. We've mapped out all 7 tests on the left and their underlying psychological goals on the right. We go from the micro-insult testing your calibration to time slippage adjusting your frame and the weaponized favor creating artificial debt. Then there's strategic forgetfulness shifting the goalposts, the information probe gathering your data, the early tragic story seeking toxic compliance, all the way down to reactionary anger at the shatter point. Whenever you feel that slight social friction in your life, just refer back to this mental checklist. All right, section 5, step-by-step tactical defense. Now that we've mapped out the threats and you know exactly what these tests look like, let's deploy our tactical defense strategy. How do we actually stop this in real time? So here is the absolutely crucial point to remember. Aggressive people rely entirely on your deep desire to avoid social awkwardness. They fully expect you to stay quiet just to save face. But here are the 4 strict steps to build an ironclad psychological shield against that. Step 1. Recognize the microtest in real time. Step 2. Break their script calmly. Step 3. Address the behavior directly without any emotional anger. And Step 4. State the boundary immediately. You don't need to win a shouting match here, you really don't. You just need to execute these steps to prove that your line cannot be moved. And that brings us to the end of our analysis. I want to leave you with a final shield challenge. Which microtest will you neutralize today? I really want you to remain highly observant as you go about your week. Keep an eye out for the time slippage, the artificial debt, those little micro insults. And when you spot one, apply that calm, assertive 4-step protocol, along with the specific scripts we just covered. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep your frame strong, stay observant out there, and I'll see you next time.